I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come and spend the day with us. There are a lot of very interesting and exciting and challenging issues and developments that are taking place in the forestry sector that affect us all. The challenge is there, and it's always tough, but it's good in that we have the opportunity and the honor and the knowledge to try to rectify these problems and work on these issues that matter so much to us in our communities. And I really want to focus on that today. I also want to spend some time today and really focus on some of the benefits and remind ourselves that while it is easy to look at some of the turmoil and the challenges that are in front of us, we can't lose sight of just how important the forestry is to our economy and our communities. And we have very good reason to be very proud and very happy of the work that we're doing and what we're providing to our communities. And I look in the crowd today, there's a lot of mayors and their councillors and MLAs, and we want to thank you for your service and your commitment to your communities and for taking a real interest in trying to solve these problems. They are challenging problems, and some of the things that are up in front of us we don't have much say on. But there's a lot of things that we do have a lot of say on, and that we can find some solutions on looking at ways of dealing with things. And I'm fearful in many ways that sometimes the debate is going off track in that, you know, if you listen to some, you'd swear there isn't a tree left in this province. And I want to make the point that there's 7 million hectares of forest land. Over 80% of our province is covered in forestry. And that's a lot of tools to work with. And what we have to come to grips with is that we all have slightly different interests. We all have some interests that we're in common. But regardless of how it is, we have all the tools in front of us to solve the problems. And I think that's one of the things that we've realized as an association, and as we've reached out to other groups to hear what their concerns, what their issues are, and as we look to our own businesses and how we're running it, as to how are we going to look to the future and get everybody agreeing at least in the general direction and working towards a common goal. And that spreads the gamut. It's everything from making sure that we are conserving enough to ensure for proper habitat and water quality and air quality, that we are protecting lands at a substantial number. I think we've all agreed in the past that the 3 or 4% is too low, so we can look towards finding that right number, and also making sure that we have the right wood from the right sources in the right market and time, so that it's all economically feasible and it works to everybody's advantage. We can make sure that we're managing for all the environmental necessities that are there, but we're also continuing to contribute to our communities, because our communities really need this. And I'm going to just jump into some slides here, and we're going to take the time to point out just how much of an impact forestry is having. And I want to do that in contrast to some of when you look at the media and you look at how when you hear the mills are closing and everything else, it's easy to point to the failures. But we have lots of successes here, and the successes are because people have worked really hard, and they have been very smart, and they have done everything that they can to keep their mills and their operations alive. And they've done that through blood, sweat, and tears. And it's been tough. And we've seen companies that have gone bankrupt and have bounced back. And they've bounced back because there's been a partnership between workers and communities and governments and all sorts of folks that are all pulling together. And that's really what communities are about. And that's what we need to focus on in the next couple of months. The minister has some very, very big decisions to make. And he's got a lot of pressure on him, and that goes to the Premier, every MLA, every mayor, and I'll tell you, every mill manager that's sitting in this room. And so how do we look at things for the benefit for all, and how do we make it come together? And I think that in those 10,000 or 20,000 model options that are there, there's something that's going to work for everybody. And we know that. And we've looked at the models. We know that there's going to be an adjustment in the way that we harvest. We know that with the new Acadian standards, that there's going to be less clear cutting. And we know that there's going to be more conservation. And we feel confident that we can do that. We also feel confident that we can access wood in the long term, and we can do that fairly as well. Whenever I get a good number, I'm very happy to throw it up as quickly as I can. But in 2009 was one of the worst years that forestry had ever seen. And the gross domestic product for forestry was roughly 3.9%. And right now, in 2010, the latest numbers that we got, it was up to 5.1. So that's a good indicator. That's a good sign that things are still moving and that we're a significant contributor to the economy. Forestry is, and you've heard us say this many times, but New Brunswick is the most forestry-dependent province in the country, more so than British Columbia and Ontario and Quebec, just by virtue of exports per province per individual. We're exporting $2,061, which is more than British Columbia per person. So as a small population, and keeping in mind that a lot of this activity is happening in our rural communities, it shows that we are very dependent and continue to and remain dependent on forestry. This is for the chart showing shipments for Atlantic Canada. So I didn't have a breakdown for New Brunswick in itself, but it's over the 4 quarters. We've seen a dramatic decrease in our shipments. In 2009, it was a decrease of 70% of shipments into the U.S. So that was pretty impactful year. But we're seeing in 2010, and this is only went to halfway through to 2010, we're seeing the numbers begin to increase again. And that's large part, there's been some shifts to some balance, and there's been some modest growth in housing starts in the U.S. Some new employment stats to share with you today. In direct employment, we're looking at 11,654 employees. But if you look at this, we hired David Campbell, who's an economist out of Moncton, to talk to Stats Canada and find out the actual value of employment. And they use what they call a multiplier. And the multiplier looks to find an accurate number as to how many jobs are spurred from those direct jobs. And when you look at that, you have roughly 21,000 families in New Brunswick are dependent or receive their income through forestry or indirectly through the support provided by the forest sector. Forestry jobs have a larger multiplier effect to them. So if you look here, oil and gas has the largest. So for every 1 job in oil and gas, you have roughly 5.7 jobs that are created in the employment field. But if you look at right below that, particle boards, fiber boards, wafer board mills, so if you look at flake board or potentially Arbeck as they come online, it's just as high as 5 jobs created for every 1 that's in that area. Sawmills is right below that at 2.5, and forestry and logging at 1.7. And I think if you look at something along the lines of call centers, it's roughly a little bit more than 1. So that's to say that the jobs in forestry have a very high value to the economy on top of just the direct taxes those employees pay and the economic activity that are created around them. There's more that spins off from those forestry jobs. And the other thing too is we know that those forestry jobs are actually much higher than average than other jobs in New Brunswick. There is over 1,300 firms in New Brunswick that identify themselves as forestry firms. And this is an actual breakdown per county. So if you look at Restigouche, there's 185 firms that identify themselves with forestry in one manner or another, and that's 12% of the province. So it's an interesting breakdown, and remind ourselves that it's not just the mills, it's the truckers, it's the crews that are in the woods, it's the support mechanisms, it's the equipment sellers that there's a whole network of companies that are reliant on that. And it's actually the vast majority of those firms are 75% of them have less than 10 employees. So these are small and independent businesses that are running it. So, you know, the forest industry, as I see it, isn't only the big companies or the big companies that are out there. While they are certainly more visible, it really is a network of small independent businesses all across the province that are the heartbeat of our sector. And it's also interesting to note that less than 21% of those firms are in the largest 3 cities, St. John, Fredericton, and Moncton. So the rest of them, 79% of them, are outside of those large 3 centers. One of the things that came out of the Forestry Summit recently and through our workings is we've been calling for years that there be a firm, set, and predictable, and of course we believe growing timber objective over time, and that we work towards finding that timber objective and we fit our models around that as well. So just as we're giving prominence to the many other objectives, we need to give prominence to wood supply and how we consider that and grow it over the long term. So when it comes time for planning, it might not be we just looking to cut wood. It might be we're looking to grow the wood that we need to cut in the future. And so without that timber objective, there's no clear plan that takes place. And so this, for us, one of the largest components of our debate and what we've been putting forward is hopefully that in the end there will come out a firm and reliable timber objective that companies can invest in, they can modernize knowing that the wood supply is there, and they can have confidence that as time goes on, if there are other objectives that are brought in, it's not going to bump those long-term plans and those investment initiatives off of the scale because of the political whims of the day. There's a lot of complex models of what that should be. We just believe it should be as clear as day of set volume of wood by species over a period of time and on a set period, a block of land. And we think that should be done for Crown, and we think that should be done for private as well. There's more royalties to be gained off of Crown lands. And depending on how much wood you access off of Crown lands, you can determine how much additional royalties can be gained off of that. We went as simple in this calculation as saying that we ran the options from everywhere from 2% to 100% increasing over a period of time. We know that we've planted over 1.5 billion trees in the last, since 1980, well, the bulk of it since 1982, but we've been planting trees for over 50 years. And those trees, that tree inventory is going to be coming online in the future. And if you look at the growth inventory curves for the forest, you'll see that in the next 20 years, those trees, there'll be more forest inventory available for harvest. And this was just a way of showing in today's dollars, we didn't forecast anything in the future, but in today's dollars, the more wood that you make available, the more Crown dollars that are available. But we also broke it down and we used the StatsCan multipliers and looked at the economic activities and the contribution to the overall economy and how that plays into factor. So, and it's just saying that it's not just the royalties that are of benefit to New Brunswick. It's everything else. And I want to just touch on that for a second. There's been some criticism, and people say, well, the Department of Natural Resources lost $32 million. And that's sort of an overall number. And so they say, well, it's a losing proposition. They're losing money. This is unacceptable. And I think that we're not looking at it in the right way. There is much, much more to just the royalty. Now, in good years, royalties have been as high as $45 or $50 million. And as things get better and prices increase and fair market value increases, we know that that will build up again, and it'll be a different game. We know that the department and industry is working very hard to lower the costs of actually managing that and being more efficient, and that's going to generate some more revenues. But let's not forget that in addition to that $32 million, that wood generated or sustained an industry, combined with private wood as well, but generated $260 million in direct taxes alone. So that were paid into the government coffers. That's the companies direct into the coffers. Industry paid over $1 billion, or just shy of $1 billion in salaries. And so there's taxes that are paid on that go also into the provincial coffers, not to mention the economic activities that are spurred in those communities and sustaining everything from the logging contractor to the Tim Hortons attendant. So these are much, much higher values than what people, I think, in the media have been attributing to the value of the wood that's coming off of Crown and private as well. So I think we have to look at that in that sense and realize that we have a real economic driver, and if we manage things right, and if we are more efficient, and if we grow more wood at a better quality over a longer period of time, we can actually substantially increase our revenues to the province and to our communities. And that's what the point that we've been trying to make is that it is critically important in providing the stability to the industry and to the sector that we have to look beyond just the immediate dollar values that came into DNR.